A man who would kill your love, when that love was all you had, was not a very good man, in Jacob Morrissey's opinion. It's even worse if that person was your wife, the person who was supposed to love you more than anyone else, a person who knew you better than anyone else, the person who saw you in your most vulnerable moments, the man who found his way into your heart, into your bones, into your blood, into your soul. It's funny how much similarities exist between all-consuming love and cancer. Jacob concluded that some types of love, like cancer, are benign, others are malignant. His wife fell into the category of malignant, and like cancer, she had to be cut out and destroyed. And Jacob knew how to do it. It was so perfect that he was sure that even she would appreciate the way it was destroyed. And such a great ending. Jacob looked behind the workbench, out the window at the garden outside. It was filled with colors. The garden of her English cottage, the one she spent so much time creating and planting, the one she loved so much, her pride and joy. But she abandoned him too. For her, it would be like coming home. Yes, Jacob decided that was poetic. Jacob stared at the blank canvas for a long time, brush in hand, waiting. I was waiting for this. It was difficult to describe. It was an impulse, a longing, a tingling in my fingertips, a flutter in my stomach, a yearning in my soul, and a need in my gut. It was a clear vision in his mind that guided his hand. Without it, there was no art. Jacob slowly turned 360, looking around the four walls of his studio, each lined with blank canvases. They leaned over him casually, like regulars, sitting with glasses of wine in their hands at one of the premieres. But unlike careless collectors, preparatory sketches were pinned to them, each of which accused him, urging him to start what he shouted to them. I'm waiting for it, just like you. If you want to attack someone, attack it. Jacob frowned and threw down his brush. She rolled across the floor, stopping only at one of the condemning canvases. Unable to bear his anger, he threw the palette on the floor. She fell face down on the floor with a crash. Still restless, he kicked it, enjoying the colorful stain it left on the wooden floor. It was the most creative thing he had achieved in months. Jacob then did what he had done every day since it left him. He went for a walk. He walked along a long, familiar tree-lined path. The maples were turning green with new spring growth below them, all the way to the gate. In the distance flowed a river of yellow, white, and green flowers. Daffodils. Jacob's feet were in the present and continued on their way, but his mind lagged behind the past. You're welcome. Jacob, let's do it. Daffodils are such happy flowers. This will make the house perfect. Jake hid his smile. Perfect was Grace's favorite word, but the driveway is so long that it would require thousands. True, but they will multiply and look better and better every year. They will multiply along with our happiness. Of course, he agreed. He always said yes to her. Jacob frowned at the abundance of daffodils. She lied. She said they were lucky flowers, and he was not happy. Dinner consisted of a can of cold baked beans, which he ate while sitting on the floor of his studio. Dessert is a handful of dried apples hardened by age and exposure to air. Their leathery texture gave Jacob's jaw a good workout. He thought wistfully of the tender, juicy roast Grace had prepared. Jacob leaned his head back and sniffed, imagining that he could smell his favorite meat roasting in a huge double-oven pork with homemade applesauce. Baby, it's time for you to quit. Dinner is already on the table, Grace whispered in his ear. Jacob winced, turned his head, and looked behind him. There was no one there, and definitely not Grace. She left a few months ago. Now Shelby was getting a roast from Grace that was to die for Shelby. Who the heck is a guy with a name like Shelby? Jacob asked in the empty room. Poor, effeminate, born with a silver spoon in his mouth. An art collector who has more money than sense. That's who. Jacob snorted, remembering how he himself had described this effeminate man who had stolen his wife. A man of fast cars and even faster women. A banal, bored, jaded millionaire. The irony was that she met Shelby at Jake's last solo show. The jerk even bought one of Jake's canvases to impress her. He must have really wanted to get under her skirt, and he paid $45,000 for the privilege. Jacob hoped that Graceful Dance, a semi-abstract work depicting a woman resembling Grace. Grace. Hence the play on words in the title. Circling in the daffodil bed, Shelby Seed curled up every time he dumped a load into her treacherous slit. Jake froze in place. He couldn't believe what his eyes were telling him. No. His mind silently screamed. She was just as her name predicted, Grace in motion. All the curves of her body smoothly flowed into the movements of the man lying under her. Her back arched sensually, her chest thrust forward. Her hands were on his hips, her head was thrown back. Her throat was exposed. Her hair reached his hips and swayed back and forth. Jake knew what it felt like. Even in silhouette, Jake knew the truth of what his mind tried to deny. It was Grace, his Grace. If he were watching an adult film, he would find it romantic. But this was not a film for adults. It was his wife, and it was obscene. Jake froze for a long time, pressing his hands to his stomach, witnessing his betrayal. Witness to his death. He tore his eyes away from the horror movie, playing out before his eyes, and looked at his hands. Jacob raised his hands to eye level. He shook his head for a moment. He was sure he saw blood. His hand of its own accord grabbed the neck of the half-full bottle of Jack Daniels. She knew what he needed. The lips obeyed, and obediently opened to accept and close around the wet hole. The throat protested, but the stomach welcomed the fiery water. Jacob carefully placed the open bottle on the floor, carefully moving it a short distance, and lay down on the floor. He rolled onto his side, assuming a fetal position. The studio floor was as good a place to sleep as any. The sound of a nearby chainsaw echoed in Jacob's head. He groaned, both from the sound itself and from the realization that it was someone calling him on his cell phone. Why did he choose this melody as his ringtone? He wanted to go back to sleep, to beautiful, meaningless oblivion, and he certainly didn't want to talk to anyone. Not today. Not ever again. The sound went on, growing stronger. Jacob growled and rolled onto his back, reaching for his work pants. Looking at the screen, he saw that it was 2:00 in the afternoon. What the heck? Where did the day go? Hello? He barked into the phone. Lord, Jake, is it really possible to answer calls like that? I could be a potential buyer, his agent said. Jacob bristled at his scolding tone. My name is Jacob Bart. What do you need? I'm busy. Yes. Okay. It doesn't matter. I hope the fact that you're busy means you're going to tell me you're okay with your show this summer. Jacob sat down, looking at the empty canvases that stared at him. Warnings from the opposite wall. Yes, fine. Everything is fine, and everything is going according to plan. My best work ever. Great. Let me know when I can come with a photographer to start cataloging them in advance of the exhibition. Yes, certainly. Jacob passed out. He looked at the jade bottle and thought about returning to oblivion. Just as he reached for the bottle, the chainsaw started working again. He glanced at the screen. Grace. Mentally, he decided to reject the call, but his finger pressed the accept button. Old habits are hard to break. Jake. The soft hesitancy in her voice only angered Jacob. It was a lie. It was all a lie. He closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. What do you want, Grace? Crap. Jacob heard her inhale noisily. Are you okay? Are you taking care of yourself? Your voice sounds strange. You don't drink too much, do you? What the heck do you care? I care, Jake. I care. Well, I had a strange feeling that you needed me, and that I should call. Jacob was not deceived. Her concern was a pretense. Well, aren't you just the Mother Teresa of unfaithful wives caring about how the poor idiot you screwed is feeling? Jake, you need to stop verbally attacking me. You must forget about what happened. We broke up at least a year before I met Shelby. Is it true? And you didn't think to tell me about it? It's funny that you are willing to continue living at my expense, sharing my bed and having love while we, how did you so eloquently put it, broke up. I just didn't know how to tell you. Well, I must commend you for your original approach to discussing this topic. Finding you having love with this loser is, of course, telling me in no uncertain terms what the status of our relationship is. Jake didn't know why he returned to the apartment. Perhaps he hoped that the visions of the previous evening were a bad dream, bad luck, disgrace, and Shelby's copulation seemed less romantic than the previous one he had witnessed, said more animalistic. Watching this picture, Jake gradually died. "Jake, are you still here?" Jacob shook his head, clearing his throat. "Yes, jerk, I'm still here." "Please stop. Please stop being rude to me. I still care about you. I'm calling because I care." Jacob ignored her request, knowing it was an act. "So how's Shelby? He's not here now. He left on business." "Oh, you better be careful, Grace. Maybe he's after some freshly married woman to seduce her. Maybe he's already tired of you. Or is it you? Are you bored? Do you want me to come and fudge you? Adulteress. Although, technically, it wouldn't be adultery. We're still married and all. Jake, stop it. I know you just want to hurt me. I'm darn right, you jerk. You deserve all those nasty words and more." Jacob was breathing heavily, as if he had run all the way down the driveway and back. "I know you. I know you still care about me, Jake." Jacob was silent. "Maybe I'll come to your place, cook you a nice dinner, and we'll talk about divorce." Jacob laughed loudly and cynically. "What are you going to do, Grace? Poison me so you can take every last coin. Isn't it enough for you? You treacherous jerk. Ripping a man's heart out isn't enough for you and Grace. I don't love you. I hate you." He heard her sharp intake of breath, and some tiny, stubborn part of him wanted to apologize and comfort her, like when their puppy was run over by a truck because he accidentally left the gate closed and she was heartbroken. But this feeling lasted only a moment, and it ended with the memories of her parting words. So cruel and caustic as she dragged the suitcase to the car. "Ignorant weakling. I only married you because I knew you would be famous. Loser. I want a man who can really fudge me. Not someone who thinks I'm Dresden, screwing porcelain fool. I just wanted so that you paint my famous portrait without saying another word." He hung up, cutting off the echoes of the past. He shuffled into the messy kitchen, pushing dirty cups and plates aside to make room on the bench. He took a frozen loaf of bread out of the freezer, and with some effort, cut off 2 slices. He stuck them in the toaster, and while he waited for them to cook, he went into the pantry and found some peanut butter. The toaster beeped, and the smell of toasted bread made his stomach growl again in anticipation. Jacob roughly spread the paste onto the bread. There was no butter. It had run out more than 3 weeks ago. He took a bite and toast in hand, walked back to the pantry door. This was the moment when old Mother Hubbard's buffet seemed plentiful. Jacob frowned in irritation. Now he will not be able to avoid a trip to the city. Jacob's wreck seemed to be chewing up the road to town and spitting it out through his anus. He used to enjoy its power. Now there is no. He didn't enjoy anything anymore. Well, at least something other than the endless oblivion caused by J.D. He made stops one after another. A post office, a hardware store, a supermarket. He stocked up on everything he needed. Everyone looked at him with pity. Everyone except the cashier. She was flirting. Jacob ignored them all before he had time to climb into the car after completing his last assignment. The sound of a chainsaw was heard in his pocket, lifting his butt off the seat and straightening his legs. Jacob was able to take his phone out of his pants pocket. He checked the screen. It was Grace. Jacob groaned, lowered his head to the steering wheel, and tapped it several times, deciding whether to answer or not. Finally, he accepted the call. "What do you need, Grace?" "Hello, Jake. How are you? Fan-screwing-tastic. Aren't you going to ask how I am?" "No, I wish you would. I miss you." Jacob shook his head. Did she really think he believed her crap? Did she really think that he had forgotten her cruel taunts? "Where is your lover? He has meetings all day today." "Tim, isn't little Gracie getting enough attention? Doesn't a lover drop everything he's doing to satisfy your every need? Like the last idiot you hooked up with? You know, the one who married you and who gave you everything. This is dishonest and untrue." Jacob was silent, knowing that she would not be able to resist trying to explain and justify herself once again. "You haven't been around for the last 2 years. I was there every day, Grace. I worked from home, if you remember. You might have been there physically, but mentally and emotionally, you weren't there. Your head was filled with art. There was no room for me. I was lonely. I needed someone. Now you are the one being unfair about 3 years ago. I finally started getting a decent price for my paintings. Instead of selling a canvas for 2 to 5,000, I began to receive more than 25,000. And I didn't hear you complain when this success allowed us to buy a house. Well, the one you called ideal, and an apartment in the city. No. You liked that part of my success. And for someone who was lonely as heck, you hit it well. And again, a picture tormenting him appeared in front of him. I'm about to reach the finish line. I'm your cheater, moaned Grace. Oh God, harder shall be harder. Keep having me. Do not stop. Each word was another twist of the knife stabbed into Jake's heart. When was the last time she was so slutty with him? Jake, are you still here? Did you hear a word of what I said? Her voice brought him back to reality. No. And moreover, I don't want to. Jacob heard her voice, warning him not to hang up, as he moved the phone away from his ear and ended the call. The aroma of lasagna bought at the supermarket smelled good to Jacob. He checked the time, wishing it would pass faster so he could eat his first proper meal in a long time. 10 minutes before leaving, his phone rang, and the sound of a chainsaw broke the silence without looking at the screen. He realized who it was. Was she supposed to ruin everything? Hello, Jake. It's me again. Yes, I got what you mean. What do you want now? I want to talk to you, baby. Jacob growled like a cornered animal. Her attempts to manipulate him infuriated him. Don't call me baby. I'm not your darn baby. I'm Jacob, the guy you dumped. You wouldn't be so upset with me, Jake, if you didn't still love me. Grace snapped, her mask slipping. You're just jealous because there's another man in my bed now, and you wish it were still. You. Outside the train window, the lush interior forests gave way to increasingly dense urban suburbs. But Jake was oblivious to it all. In truth, he avoided looking out the window because instead of the passing scenery, all he saw were images of Grace making love to another man. He didn't know why, and the pain from it was almost unbearable, but he still felt obligated to do it. He followed Grace. He kept hoping that he would witness her end her affair, that he would hear her tell her lover that she loved her husband too much to continue. This time, she said she was going to the city for the weekend. He decided to take the train and rent a car rather than risk Grace recognizing his car. He parked on the opposite side of the narrow street from Shelby Coburn's mini mansion in the fashionable suburb of Paddington, and waited. He knew that Grace could easily beat him to the city. The train was moving much slower than her little Lexus sports car. He had already visited their apartment in Bondi and made sure that neither she nor her car were there. Jake assumed this meant she intended to stay the night at her lover's house. Jake watched whole neighbors return home, walk their dogs, drive off to parts unknown, and generally go about their business. And while he waited, he was tormented by the question of her choice of lover. Her choice was offensive in itself. The guy was a spoiled, handsome guy. Playboy inherited wealth immediately after graduating from school. He took a high position in the family company. Everything was presented to him on a silver platter. What did Grace see in him? Did she truly believe that he would change his ways for her? That she wouldn't bore him as much as all the other women he'd pursued? Jake may not have had the same level of wealth as Shelby Holborn, but his last 3 exhibitions have grossed over $750,000 million each, and he is now a prominent figure in the art world. New Australian Brett Whiteley. On top of that, he was a self-made man. Nobody handed him anything on a silver platter, and he wasn't petty wine or selfish. His patience was rewarded, although for Jake, the reward was bittersweet. He turned out to be right. She really intended to stay the night at her lover's house. He was close enough to see that the slit of her cocktail dress almost reached her waist, as she stepped out of Hole, Burns' elegant Ferrari. The jerk didn't even have the manners to open the door for her. He was close enough to see that the neckline of the almost dress was so deep that there was no way she could put on a bra. Worse, he was close enough to overhear their conversation, which apparently began in the car. Do you really think I can get that much if it comes to divorce? Jake's jaw dropped in surprise. Divorce? Did she want to divorce him? He thought the decision would be his. He would confront her. She would beg for forgiveness, swear that she loved only him and promise to end the affair, and he would decide to forgive. It would be difficult and take time, but for her sake, he would try. He loved her enough to give her a second chance. Yes, I checked the value of both properties you guys bought at the right time. Property prices have skyrocketed since then. And then you have dollars in the bank. His own art collection. Holborn fell silent significantly. Wow, I didn't even think about his work. Holborn laughed. They will be worth even more when he dies. And of course, being still married to him, you will automatically inherit everything. But what if he doesn't commit self-deletion before the divorce is final? You will still inherit his property unless he changes his will. And even then, you may be able to challenge it. Good God, she wanted him dead. She wanted him to commit self-deletion. That Grace had used the knowledge he had entrusted to her at the very beginning of their relationship. To push him over the edge was too much. What child wouldn't try to commit self-deletion after being told he was the only surviving member of his family after a car accident? The last piece of Jake Morrison died. Jake, can you at least answer me? I'm Jacob, and no, I can't answer you because I didn't listen to you. Jacob sensed her anger and disappointment. Well, you better start listening. I'm quickly losing my patience. You can't avoid me forever. I can try a good old-fashioned college try. He smiled as her mask of false sincerity fell again. Well then, at least do it forever. Go upstairs, loser, and save us from this divorce. Jacob laughed and hung up. Jacob stood in front of his easel, the now familiar disappointment welling up inside him. Nothing. No, it. Jacob hated Grace for depriving him of it, as well as for her betrayal, for her evil desires. He looked to the left, behind the workbench, out the window at the garden of her cottage. He often watched her as she worked in the garden. His last work was a semi-abstract depiction of her in various guises in the gardens that surrounded their home. How could she say he wasn't there mentally and emotionally when he'd been following her around for 12 months, drawing her, photographing her, painting her in her favorite gardens? She could not. Her words were a lie. A deliberate lie designed to poison his memories. A conscious attempt to rewrite their history by making him out to be the villain. And all this in order to justify her deception, her greed, a way to justify her infidelity, a way to drive him crazy, to drive him to self-deletion. Jacob chuckled. She could lie to herself and everyone else as much as she wanted. He knew the truth. The truth was that she had a malignant cancerous tumor. A tumor grew in his life. A fantasy of destroying Grace played out in Jacob's head. He looked at her garden, and as he looked at it, the colors seemed to become even more saturated. Blues, more vibrant yellows, more radiant reds, deeper and richer like blood. Even the greens became greener, like moss on the forest floor. Euphoria poured through the veins, filling the heart, head, and fingertips. Soon, Jacob reached for the bottle of Jack Daniels and took a sip. The fiery water mixed intoxicatingly with euphoria. Jacob checked his phone and smiled. 6 messages. He guessed who was calling. He took pleasure in thwarting her attempts to talk to him. He hoped her composure was crumbling as quickly as his sanity. He decided to reward himself. He finally went to the mailbox to get the mail. He might not have read anything, just added a handful to the already huge collection that occupied his office desk. But the fact that he had emptied the mailbox was worthy of recognition. He sat at the dining table, leaning back in his chair, drinking coffee. He added Jade to it and dialed the number to access his messages. Hey Jakey, it's me. Please call me back, baby. I'm worried about you. Jacob snorted. Who did she think she was fooling with? Her sweet words? No one, and definitely not his. Jacob waited for the standard voice to tell him the date and time of the second message left on his cell phone. Jake, it's me again. I know you're here. Please stop ignoring my calls. I need to talk to you. Call me back as soon as you get this message. Jacob smiled, noticing the hint of irritation in her tone. Grace was not the most patient person, and Jacob knew better than anyone that she hated being ignored, while waiting for the third message. He took a sip of coffee, to his disappointment. It was Bart, his agent, who wanted to know how the next show was going. Jacob frowned. We'll have to call the leech back and calm his fears. Otherwise, Bart is just as likely to show up unannounced, and that won't do at all. No way. Another sip of coffee. Another general introduction about the time and date of message number 4. Jake, you ignorant moron. You better darn well call me back or you'll regret it. I'll make your life a misery. Jacob was grinning from ear to ear. Darn. Grace looked upset. Now she was shouting her messages. And who did she call an ignorant idiot? At least he always opened doors for her, brought home her favorite chocolates every time he went into town, and made her coffee every morning, which she sipped while still in bed because she didn't like mornings. Did handsome Shelby do all this? Jacob thought not. Most likely he was too busy following in the footsteps of his grandfather and father, and wondering how to spend his next million to bother with such trivial considerations. He definitely didn't open the car doors for her, and he really enjoyed calling her a fool. Jacob shrugged. Maybe she liked being treated like a cheap fool. Maybe that was where he was wrong. Nurturing her and treating her with love and respect certainly didn't work. Message number 5 was a return to sugary sweetness, a passionate apology full of affection and requests to call her. This should have won her an Oscar after receiving the last message. Jacob felt elated. He selected the message service number needed to repeat the message. He closed his eyes and threw his head back, enjoying the exultation. That's it, Jake. My patience is over. No one will avoid me anymore. I'm going to the house, and you better darn well be there. Jacob selected the option to save the message. He refilled his coffee, added another shot of JD, and walked into his studio. His gaze immediately went to the window. He put the phone to his ear and listened to Grace's last message. He smiled as he looked at her cottage garden. Soon, he promised the flowers. Soon, she would be home. Jacob heard the car before he saw it. He smiled as he rushed out the back door and walked around the side of the cottage where Grace lived. Grabbing a weapon that he was sure Grace would appreciate, he found the hidden entrance to the garden, a narrow zigzag path where every turn was cleverly disguised, and carefully made his way to the grassy center where she had placed a low stone bench. She called it her secret garden, her secret place to think, read, or daydream. Jacob went there to hide, hiding behind a wall of bushes. Jacob admired how cleverly Grace had arranged the garden. The large hills slowly rose in height, and different types of flowers were planted in tiers. At the time, she said, it allowed her to grow more varieties and show them off. The garden looked impenetrable. The top row of gladioli hid the fact that in the center of the mound there was a narrow but deep depression. If Jacob had wanted to, he could have stood halfway up the side of the ravine and remained unnoticed. And Jacob was 5'8". Instead, he made himself comfortable and waited. He listened to the car approaching. He recognized her as Grace's Lexus. The car stopped, in his opinion, right behind his car. What came as a surprise was the sound of 2 car doors opening and closing. Interesting. Jacob wanted to take a look to make sure it was the handsome Shelby she had brought with her. If so, he could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. He heard voices too far away to make out the words, but clear enough to understand that one of them was male and the other female. Jacob smiled. He closed his eyes to avoid peripheral distractions and focused on the sounds that were getting louder as they got closer. He should be here, Grace said. His car is here. I'll check inside. Maybe you could go around the house and see if he's somewhere outside. Sure, baby. I can't wait to see his face when he sees that I'm here with you. Jacob grinned. Handsome Shelby may well have seen more than he expected before the end of the day. Grace giggled. You're so bad, honey. You like it bad, my little fool? Yes, I love we are a match made in heaven. Do you think my confrontation and ridicule of him will be enough to pee him off? Jacob shook his head at Hoboken's arrogance. He could only assume that they thought he was in his studio and couldn't hear them. I hope so. I'm so tired of pretending I care. Do you have any idea how hard it is, day after day, year after year, to pretend that you are a pretty butterfly when in fact you are an eagle? Jacob's lips curled at Grace's metaphor. She was not a majestic eagle. She was a hyena, a scavenger ready to pounce on a corpse. Well, who is bad now? Grace giggled again, echoing Holborn's words. You like bad things. That's why you love me. You and I are similar. And then Jacob heard the front door open. The walls muffled her voice, but he could make out that she was calling his name. He imagined her walking from room to room, her frustration growing when she didn't find him. Yes, Jakey Poo. Jacob heard Shelby mutter. Come out, wherever you are. Shelby's maliciously condescending tone didn't bother Jacob. He knew he'd have the last laugh. He listened, hearing doors opening and closing, and Grace calling his name. Everything was quiet for a moment, and Jacob wondered where she was. Shelby. Jacob got his answer nearby in the direction of her voice. Jacob realized that she was standing at his workbench and calling to him through the open studio window. Yeah, baby, Shelby replied. Judging by his steps, he was approaching from the back of the house. Did you find him? No, I haven't checked out that shed in the backyard yet. This is a pottery barn. There was a pause, and Jacob imagined Shelby's questioning look. The previous owner was a professional potter. There are 2 state-of-the-art kilns and an electric pottery wheel. He died, and we bought the place from his daughter. I take it he's not in the house? No, and you should have seen this place. It looks like it was hit by a bomb. I don't think he's washed the dishes or changed the sheets since I left. There are empty Jack Daniels bottles everywhere. The trash can is overflowing and it stinks to high heaven. Apparently, he lost a lot. It may be even easier than we thought. Jacob noticed that Grace spoke completely calmly. There was no worry in her voice. You'd think she was discussing the weather, not her husband's self-deletion. Do you think he has already committed self-deletion? I don't know, maybe, Grace answered thoughtfully. Of course, he started talking differently lately, and it's not like him to ignore my calls. Should I check the pottery barn? Yes, you can, but I dare to inspect the house again. He's probably hiding in the closet under the bed or some other equally stupid place. Okay, meet me here at 5. Jacob's pulse quickened. My ears started ringing. It's almost time. He took a slow, deep breath to calm himself. Jacob tucked the weapon into the back pocket of his work pants and moved back down the narrow path as quietly as possible, stopping in front of the entrance and crouching down. He winced as the weapon pressed against him and shifted his position slightly to relieve the pressure. He counted down the minutes, anticipating how impatience would overcome him. The muscles in his thighs protested against the forced immobility, but he ignored the discomfort. He waited until Shelby was half a meter from his hiding place. Hey, lover, are you looking for me? Jacob asked casually, getting up and leaving the garden. Shelby turned around, clearly surprised. He reflexively took a step back. What the heck? Where? Shelby fell silent. He shook his head, straightened his shoulders, straightened himself, and took a step forward. Well, look at you, Jakey boy. Aren't you a sight to behold? Anyone would think you lost your wife. Jacob tilted his head to the side, as if perplexed. Wow. I didn't know that you're not only a clown, but also a corporate jerk. It must look good on your resume. Be careful, Jakey boy. You forget who's in charge here. I'll give you a hint. It's not you. I already have your wife. And by the way, isn't she a sweet fool? Too much woman for you. My advice. Women like Grace need a firm hand, not the love crap you showered on her. Shelby Holborn grinned evilly. And Jakey boy, I must say that after my little tour of your hacienda, I have decided that I really like the idea of a country house. Yes, I guess I'll take that too. Jacob smiled. It was more like thinning of the lips, exposure of the teeth. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and wrapped his hand around the weapon in his back pocket. Holborn raised his hands, clenching them into fists, ready to fight. He was too slow. Jacob entered Shelby's personal space, which prevented Holborn from identifying Jacob's weapon without breaking eye contact. Something Jacob was sure he wouldn't do. It's a pity, Jacob thought. I would like the awareness of his imminent death to be reflected in his eyes. Oh well, you can't have everything. Jacob plunged the garden fork, its carefully sharpened teeth, into the soft flesh of Shelby's stomach, and she was soft. The guy should spend more time doing abdominal exercises with one hand. Jacob angled the fork upward, pressing hard, aiming to pierce Shelby Holborn's heart. Apparently, the way to a man's heart really was through his stomach. He would prefer to rip out the heart. It would be more symmetrical, but he would have to get a piercing. He covered his mouth with his other hand, muffling his screams. He looked deeply into Bourne's eyes, enjoying the expression of shocking horror. Whole. Bourne's hands clung to Jacob's as if trying to hold him back. Jacob brought his face so close to Bourne's that their noses were almost touching. He gave him a deliberately mad look. Get A for Colburn. Jacob laughed happily at the pun, and was sure that even Martin Riggs, Mel Gibson's character in the Lethal Weapon film series, would have been pleased with his cleverness. Shelby. Jake. Grace's voice momentarily distracted Jacob from his joke. He looked over Holbein's shoulder and smiled at his wayward wife. Hello, Grace. How nice of you to drop by to see your lover. As Grace took a confused step forward, Jacob gave one last push-hold. Bourne's last breath rushed over his face. Jacob wrinkled his nose. This guy recently ate garlic. Jacob felt pressure on his wrist as whole. Bourne's knees buckled. He pulled out a garden fork, and Holburn fell at his feet like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Grace looked from her lover to Jacob's hand. My God, Jake, what have you done? I thought it was obvious, Jacob replied, grinning. I hooked my lover with a fork. I wanted to see what all the fuss was about, so I stabbed him. You're right. It's fun. A little dirty, but yeah, fun. Oh my God. Oh my God, Grace repeated over and over again, backing away from him. Jacob walked around Holborn, motionless. Body. Grace took another step back. Jacob took another step forward. The faster Grace retreated, the faster Jacob advanced. Grace shook her head. Jacob nodded his head, and then she turned and ran. Jacob gave chase. Adrenaline pulsed through his veins, and he realized what it was like to be a lion chasing a gazelle. It was intoxicating. He closed the gap, adjusting his grip on the garden fork. Running at full speed, he boomeranged Grace's legs with his fork and grinned as she fell face first onto the lawn a meter from the car in an instant. Jacob was on top of her, flipping her onto her back and straddling her, pinning her arms to her sides with his thighs. He squeezed it tightly, venturing to lean to the side to reach for the garden fork. Your lover said that you like it rough, that you need a steady hand. Well, how do you like it, Grace? Jake, don't. Please don't, she whined, clearly scared. I'm not Jake. I'm Jacob. What? Jakey, please don't hurt me. Do you love me? I know that you love me. Read my lips, jerk. My name is Jacob. I'm not Jakey. Jake loved you, but not me. Oh God, how he loved you. He was the only person who cared about you. You were a reason for him to breathe. And how did you repay his devotion? You screwed him. You killed him. Grace sobbed, rolling her head from side to side. Jake, you're talking nonsense. Please listen to me. You are not this Jacob. You're Jake Morrissey. You are my husband, and you love me, just like I love you, how I have always loved you. I came here today to ask for your forgiveness. Jacob laughed. Nice try, jerk. That's why you brought your lover with you. Was he going to ask for forgiveness too? Yes. You love Jake? Of course I did. That's why you spent months trying to get him off balance. You tried to kill the guy who gave you everything. But even then, you and your lover didn't have the courage to do it yourself. You wanted Jake to do it for you. The guy who gave you the perfect house with the perfect garden tried to be the perfect husband and give you the perfect life. What did you give him? You are Jake. You love me? She sobbed. No, I do not like it. When Jake looked into your eyes, do you know what he thought he saw? Angela. Sweet and perfect angel. You're Jake, not Jacob. Grace squirmed and jerked, trying to free herself, but Jacob sat on her like a rodeo cowboy, and his weight was too much for her to throw off. Do you want to know what I see when I look into your eyes? Grace whimpered, repeating her previous words with tears in her eyes. You are Jake, Jake Morrissey, and Jake is gentle and kind. Jake loves me. You're not Jacob. I see a cancerous tumor. What do we do with malignant tumors? Like a broken record? Grace sobbed. You are Jake, Jake Morrison, and you love me. We cut them out. That's what we do. With these words, Jacob pierced the lying eyes of the cancer. Jacob whistled as he mixed Holborn's ashes with fertilizer. Daffodils will be delighted with the upcoming feeding, just as Cottage Garden fell in love with Grace. The thought of Grace in the garden reminded Jacob that he needed to move the sprinkler. Mentally, he checked the box on his to-do list. Delete Grace's phone messages. Check. Take Lexus to Sydney disguised as Grace. Check. Sneak into a Sydney apartment and leave. Sign divorce papers. Check. Recycle Grace and hold Bourne's phones along with the disguise. Check using the second disguise. Board the train. Check. Disposal of the second disguise. Check. Vacuum the inner surface of the stoves. Check. Wash the inside of ovens with bleach. Check. Clean stove. Chimneys. Check. Make dishes for firing in a kiln and use in artistic works. Check. Scatter grass seed around killing areas. Fertilize and water. Check. Clean the house from top to bottom. Check. Take a shower, shave, and get a haircut. Check. Once again, appear in the city in a normal and healthy form. Check. It was 3 weeks before police approached him with questions about the disappearance of his wife and Shelby Holborn. Jacob couldn't do anything to help them other than confirm their affair. A week later, they returned with a search warrant, and despite their best efforts, they found nothing. The case remains open. Bart was delighted with the paintings for Jacob's next exhibition and said they were his best work. He waxed lyrical about Jacob's vibrant color scheme and use of ceramic shards, which give the canvases an almost three-dimensional appearance. He told Jacob that he would use words like kaleidoscope and quasi-mosaic in the exhibition brochure. He didn't say it in so many words, but he did let Jacob know that his recent notoriety wouldn't hurt his sales. He even predicted that sales at the exhibition would exceed the 1 million mark. Jacob was just happy that it was back. Oh, and the daffodils really like the